associate for a couple of years now. My background has been data, so very much through the business intelligence, modeling, predictive type angle, all the way through to data governance. And I'm happy to be here with you all today.
Excellent. Thank you, Rav. Next up on my screen is Ed. So do you want to introduce yourself, Ed?
So my name is Ed Mathai. I'm in the United States. I'm the founder of Silent Distortion. We're a company that helps other companies do data governance, specifically in understanding the value of their data and managing those processes as they go through.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. And Ed is a really good teacher of things. He's often running sessions on our monthly calls, teaching us all sorts of wonderful things. He's a very, very clever chap. Rob Hawker, I've got you next.
Great. Thanks, Nicola. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. So I'm Rob Hawker. I spent the first half of my career in data, working on the data governance, data management side of things at Vodafone. And I see Gabby Tilkey on the call. Great to see you, Gabby. We worked together at Vodafone. And I see Ed Simpson as well. We worked at Nationwide together for a little while. Nice to see you, Ed. So that was the first half of my data career. And then I moved into the analytics side of things. So these days I focus on Microsoft Power BI and Microsoft Fabric, which has been released in the last year or so. I've been getting more and more expertise on that. And that brings me into contact with something called the Microsoft Power Platform, which is a place, one option, if you like, where you could go ahead and build something like this data catalog tool. So I'm here from the kind of technical angle a little bit. I came into contact with Nicola and her lovely associates actually through writing a book. So I wrote a book called Practical Data Quality and asked Nicola to write the foreword, and having known of her for a long time, and then yeah, got to know her really well from doing that and meeting this absolutely great group that we have. Really nice to be with everyone.
Excellent. Well, we love you being in the group as well, Rob.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, and not of all of my associates, but just the ones that's doing this masterclass with me, is Rob Sawnby, who is not got his camera on.
No, apologies. Can you hear me?
We can, Rob.
Yeah, just joining from a phone from a remote location. So yeah, apologies, no camera. But I've known Nicola for a number of years. In fact, we worked together a while back. But yeah, my background is really enterprise data management, and my sort of career history has mainly been in finance and pharma, so heavily regulated industries. But I've also done stints in sort of e-commerce and advertising. So yeah, one of my passions is cataloging data. So to be able to manage it and govern it, you need to understand it. So that's really a strong interest of mine.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And I have to say, Rob Sawnby is my go-to man if I have any questions about software tools for data catalogs and data governance. It's great. I've got this group of friends that can answer any question that I can't. This is what I'm hoping. At any rate, this next hour or so could prove this otherwise. So before I start asking the questions, I just thought it would be useful to do a very quick recap of what a data catalog, data glossary is, in case anybody on the call was very early on in their journey and perhaps wasn't really sure. So when you hear people talking about what we do when we do data governance, we talk a lot about it helps us understand our data. And we do that by capturing data definitions. So we agree what we mean by a customer or a student or a product, and it's a lot harder than that easy statement sounds. But once we've agreed it, we need to document it somewhere where everybody can access it, so that we've gone through that pain of agreeing something, we can actually document it. And so for many years, that was called a data glossary or a business glossary. And we put it's a business definition. You tend to have one glossary for a whole enterprise or organization. So a lot of people get confused as to whether they're the same as a data dictionary. Data dictionaries have been around as long as databases have been around, and you tend to have one per database or system, and they should have a description of each data field. But I mean, my personal experiences, they were probably written by somebody in IT on the project that implemented that system. And sometimes they are closer to reality of a business understanding of that term than others. So it can sometimes be a good place to start to get definitions, but quite a lot of the time care must be exercised is probably the polite way of saying. But we need to start building one glossary across a whole organization that captures our definitions as we agree them. So I think a few years back, people started talking about data catalogs as well. And at this point, the Rob, Zed, and Rav, feel free to interrupt if I'm getting any of this wrong. But if you are being really semantic about it, there is a difference between a catalog and a glossary. But all it actually does is create another layer of definitions and organization. And anybody that's seen me talk about data governance before will know I advocate simplicity. And I think a lot of times when people say data catalog, they don't mean what it truly was meant to be when somebody first used the term. They mean a data glossary. So when we're using the term catalog today, we're meaning it's a data glossary, it's a data catalog. Yeah, I don't know. Do you all agree? Have I messed that up totally? Or good. It's always a relief when we do that. So the thing is, you know, if you were doing data governance, when I started it nearly 23 years ago, it took me a while to work out I needed to document the data definitions. No tools existed. Whereas now they're everywhere. If you go to a conference, you can't avoid all the data governance software vendors that are there. And they will tell you you absolutely have to have one, and you absolutely have to have the massive budget to buy one. A lot of my clients have never been in a position to do that. And it's a common problem that people face. And I personally don't think it's necessarily a good idea, even if you have got the budget, to go straight into buying a tool until you've worked out what it is that you want to do and what you're actually doing with your data catalog or data glossary. So I think it is always good to start small, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily easy or you even know where to start, which is why we thought it would be a really good idea to have this masterclass to share with you our thoughts. So that was the kind of, I suppose, groundwork foundation. So we all agree, we understand what we're talking about here. But the question really is, you know, what are your options for a data catalog if you don't have the budget? Let's assume nobody on this call is lucky enough to do it. And I'm going to pick on Ed to go first and say, you know, so what are your options if you haven't got a lovely big budget available?
So yeah, so first let's look at what the sort of the big data catalogs provide, right? They provide a data store because what you're putting in is data. It's metadata because it's data about data, but it's data. And so they have a store where they keep that information. They also manage your access, like security, and getting the right people to do the right things. You know, the ones who need to access it are allowed to access. Everybody else is kept out. Most of them do workflows because in the process, you're really communicating with other people. Data governance is more about communication than data, I believe. So when you're looking at your data, you really want to communicate with others. And a lot of these systems, the big systems, will do workflows and allow you to automate those things to get approvals. And then the last thing that most of them have are like a self-generation mechanism. They'll go through your database systems and will catalog the information that's there. And I think I would agree with Nicola that most of the time they're not categorizing the important things where you're deciding on what it means, you're all agreeing on it. They're just saying, here was a field, here's how much data is in there. It's really just looking at the table itself. So probably the big thing we need to look at is what factors are important. And I'm going to say a couple of them, but I know that other people might have other ones. So we'll sort of open that up at the end. Remember, it's data. So one of the important factors that you are looking for when you're looking at what creating a data catalog from scratch is that it you want to have good data governance practices. It's data, you need good data governance practices. You want accountability, security of the data. You need to make sure it's accurate and that it's consistent. One of the ways I used to do data catalogs is you do it in Excel because that's all you had. You did Excel and you're emailing it out to everybody. Well, I email it to 10 people. They send me 3 different copies of it. I got to find out what's different from each one of them. And it was just kind of a mess. And you lose some of that consistency and security as you go through that process. Another thing that's really important is really the collaboration. You need some kind of tool where you're working together and everybody can get at it. I've seen big shops who do a great job of collecting data and storing it, and a really horrible job of getting that back out to the users who need it. They don't have a good system for doing that. And so that's really important in these kind of systems. And then the next thing you want to look at is the integration for your current standpoint. So one of the key things that I think is really important is you need to kind of go, what do we have available already? What's out there? What meets our needs and what doesn't? And so some of the things we're going to mention, and Microsoft is a big example of this. Most people have Microsoft products. And with that, a very small investment in something like Power BI will get you a lot of benefit, give you a lot of these things that need to be done. So, but if you're not a Microsoft shop, you've got something else, then you would want to use whatever it is you've got available. So those are big ones. Anybody else want to bring some other ones up that they think is really important to mention?
I would probably raise your philosophy around how you want to manage your data glossary. So the 2 philosophies I tend to see, number one, where people want to make it almost like Wikipedia internally, allow anyone in the organization to make an update to the data definitions, and then have those updates come to a small trusted central group of stewards who will then make sure that the updates are appropriate. So like Wikipedia in the sense that it's open, but not open to the point of Wikipedia where anyone can edit anything and it self-polices, self-governs. You still need to police it with that sort of central group, right? So that's one philosophy. The other philosophy I see is that only that central group gets access even, and they have to go out and collect the changes to data definitions from people all over the organization. And I think sometimes you'll find that the tool that might fit your budget may not fit your philosophy, so you have a particular idea in mind, but the tool that you want to buy, so I know one of the tools, for example, is not really designed for that open philosophy that I discussed at the beginning. And so if you want to bring in a huge number of people, you're paying for a huge number of seats at quite an expensive price for each seat. So in that case, it just might not be ever budget friendly enough for you to work with that particular vendor. So you have to think about your own solution potentially. So that's one of the big factors for me, is that kind of, I mean, personally, I'm a big believer in that open philosophy where you're kind of crowdsourcing all the definitions from people all over the organization, and then you keep that strong central control to make sure that only the good definitions actually get accepted. But I found it hard to find tools out there that were supportive of that in their licensing structure and things like that.
Very true. So it feels like a lot of the time it's possibly going to be an Excel spreadsheet that we start with. Is that right?
Yeah.
So there are lots of options with that, Nicola. When you look at different pieces, remember, first of all, is integration. So one of the keys that you see a lot of times is like Power BI, because with Power BI, you can get one person who gets the license for Power BI. Everybody else in the organization has pieces where they can pull data to and from. And as long as they have a Microsoft product at all, they'll usually be able to do the workflows. They don't have to develop the workflows. It's stuff they already have, so they could make a lot of that work. And Microsoft tends to focus on simplifying the models for these things so that they're very easy to use. It's a good system. But you could also do something with like Google Sheets, right? Instead of sending out all kinds of Excel files to everybody to get them to look at it and do some changes. You just put it into a Google Sheet and it tracks the history of it. You can manage who gets access to it, and everybody's looking at the same piece all the time. They're not seeing their own copy that they made some changes to and didn't know anybody else didn't have those changes. When it comes to workflows and stuff like that, Google Sheets tends to be a little more advanced when you're trying to do workflows. You have to know some coding behind the scenes. If you know Python, JavaScript, Go, or Rust, any of those languages, they're really great. If you don't know those, it's a little bit harder to do some of that. But there are some other things, like if you're ready for a workflow, right? I would suggest just focus on the data store first, get that in place, get the data that you need so that people can understand what they're looking at. And then you could put in workflows, because you can always do a simple workflow in Google by doing a Google form. You have a form where the worksheet's out there, you send this Google form to the 5 people who need to approve it, and they approve it and make some notes if they want to. And then you have somebody at the central office look at all those. And if everybody approved it, they update the sheet, the official sheet, that nobody has right access except for that person. There's ways you can manage it through the process rather than just the software. But there's also some smaller guys that you can look at. So for workflows, for data stores, you can look at companies like Airtable or Smartsheets. Those are very nice. They're like data stores as a service, and you just go on the Airtable, and you'll make a little table up, and you put the information in there, and you could, if you don't have Google Sheets or something else that matches your store. There's MongoDB and Firestore if you know how to do some coding. So those are good options there. For workflows, again, Microsoft Power BI is going to get you a long way. But if your company already has some large technical systems like Asana, Jira, or Confluence, those are 3 big workflow systems that IT organizations use a lot to manage their projects. You could put in there also your data catalog workflows to get it approved. But then there's also smaller ones that you can look at that are they're really no code. Stuff like Zapier, people have heard of that a lot of times, Make or N8N. They're really made to connect to all these other services and then give you a process to then get approval, right? So you could say, when I put an entry in this worksheet in my Google spreadsheet, then I want you to kick off and send emails to these 5 people. And then when they've finished filling out whatever it is, they'll send it back to you and you approve it automatically. And it makes that really easy.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. You're always this kind of gold mine of, you just know so many different tools and everything. It's amazing.
I'm a geek. I want one of those persons.
Yeah, but geeks are great. So what I would say is, obviously, I'm glad I'm recording this because people might want to go back and re-listen to this, get some ideas. But when you were talking, you were also kind of perhaps dropping in some factors that might help you determine which of these options you're going to do. Because you were definitely saying, perhaps if your company's a Microsoft shop, then there's going to be one route you're going to go opposed to another. Are there any other factors that you think people need to consider when they're choosing what to do?
Yeah, the really big one is integrating into what you already have. So if you saw, I sort of did, if you own Microsoft, if you got, that's a really good tool to do. And I think Rob's going to do some Power BI stuff, because he'll show you how easy it is, and a lot of companies already have that. If you don't, there are these other companies that are like no code that you can wire up to do some of that stuff, but you have to put in a little bit of work, but it's usually pretty easy. That's the Make and Zapier and all those. But then you could create your own. There are other app building standalone sites like Tadabase and Softer and Firebase, where you can actually create an app that does this with data store, workflows. It's got all that kind of stuff, but that'll take a little bit more to do. So I think the key factor is really how do I integrate into what I currently have? And I would suggest, like you suggested earlier, it really does make a big difference if you start with some sort of Excel type spreadsheet, you put in the information you want, you figure out exactly what's important to you. And then if you went to one of the big systems, you're taking that data, rolling it into what you need, and then it's actually useful right off the bat.
No, that's really useful. Thank you, Ed. So before we go on to the other questions that I prepared to put you all on the spot, we've got a couple of questions in the chat, which I think are really interesting, and probably now's the right time to answer them. So Sharnaz, well, we've actually got 3 questions there. They're coming in thick and fast. Sharnaz has asked, what's her definition of a data catalog versus a business glossary? I don't know if anybody wants to go for that one. Or you're going to look at me.
No, I mean, I see. I was thinking about this, and I'm quite happy to be disagreed with. By the way, I'm sure there's many different definitions here, but off my thinking, they are very, very similar things. First of all, for me, the business glossary is more that kind of the talking about the individual business terms, the entities of data and the attributes within them, focusing on what they all mean, what they all do. Whereas the data catalog, I would say, potentially would be more complete. It would include other information about those data items, such as which processes that they might be included in, potentially which reports and things like that they might be included in. So I would personally say that's the key difference between the two. The glossary is just about those business entities and fields and definitions, whereas the catalog has got that extra information about usage of the data and, and those side of things. I don't know if you would have a different opinion, Nicola.
I probably would have put all of that in one. I wonder when Sharnaz was saying business glossary, if you're meaning some organizations have these are what our business terms, but without any like data owners and some of the stuff that you were just saying, Rob. And when they exist, I try and absorb them into my data glossary or data catalog, because I just think the least different places we've got differing definitions.
Agreed.
Better. I think we want to pull everything together. And one of my clients recently became aware of they'd got some, I can't remember, they were kind of some library function for the business. They're not a university, I think, but they had this library function. One of the things they did was to create a business glossary that was different from their data glossary that they've been building. And he was asking me whether I felt he should go and take over control of this and add it into his data glossary. And I'm going, yes, wonderful idea. And I said, because we want everything all in one place. So I think that is really useful. But then Joseph has asked a very related question about, do you make a distinction between a data and a metadata catalog, or are we talking about the same thing? So I think my view is, I'd be interested to see what the 4 of you think, but my view is that there are some purists out there that tell you they're different, but we come back to my same old mantra of keep it simple. And I think any kind of data catalog is metadata, is data about that data. So I think everything should be in one, but I don't know, do you all agree?
I was thinking the same as you on that one. Same thing.
I actually woke up this week thinking about that, and you could get into this turtles all the way down, where you've got a metadata glossary that shows about your data glossary, and then you got a metadata to talk about that one, and really you just have one data glossary says, and it references itself. This data is managed this way, and it talks about it.
Yeah. I would generally agree, but I just think when you're looking at both in one, we need to be very careful about how the business will read the document and interact with it. Because sometimes when you kind of conflate both a business end and a technical end, there can be a lot of confusion, and that can then kind of turn people off from wanting to engage with things. So for me, it's all about being super clear and using lay language that people can interact with and they understand, and that will encourage people to interact with the catalogue rather than create the opposite environment.
I love that. That's an excellent
point.
point.
I agree with that, because one of the things I see with business glossaries or data glossaries is that the only people who use it are the people who are arguing about the definition of some term anyway. So it's really just I've found it's a cudgel rather than a helpful tool. And the people who, anybody else who's not in that argument doesn't ever use that document. Where a data catalog I think of as like a library catalog. I go into the library, I want to know what's available, what the book's about, the sort of some information, where can I find it, how do I get access to it, and then what's in it is really important. Who, how it supports, who it supports and how, and those are data fields that you can add later as you find that they're useful to you in a data catalog, I think.
Mm. And I personally, perhaps I would keep them separate to go to Rav's point. If you don't have a tool, if you've got the budget to buy one of these big catalog tools, and perhaps Rob S's answer is good at that, but you can set up views, so you can put all of your data in there, but then you set up views to say, if you're a business user, you don't need all this technical metadata because you're not going to understand it or know what to do with it. But if you are a DBA, you might want access to all of this, or if you're on the analytics team, and then you can manage it better. I don't know if you'd all agree. So perhaps that's a reason why you would keep them separate, not keep them separate if you're doing a more basic way. But if you've got the functionality to create views, different views, then you could put them all in one.
Yeah, I think technically you could separate them out, but that's coming from someone who's a self-proclaimed geek. My wife says I'm a dork, but it's really the same thing. So
I think geek's much more complimentary because we're all geeks here. So excellent. So I think we might leave the other questions till the end because I think they might follow on when we've had a bit more of a chat. And I'm going to pick on Rav because I know Rav's had some experience of this. But Rav, from your experience, what are the challenges of using, say, Excel or Google for your data catalog instead of a tool?
Well, I've not really had much experience of kind of formal tools at all. So a lot of places that I've worked with, it has been Google Sheets or Excel. And I think Ed has touched on a fair few of them. The general troubles that everybody faces with any type of Excel spreadsheet or any type of Google Sheet, and that is authenticity, utility. There's a lot of saving and circulating copies. So the authenticity of spreadsheets may be brought into question. They're not necessarily very engaging either. And again, I'm kind of seeing it from a business interactive point of view, in that if I want to understand something about something, I'm not going to be attracted to going to an Excel spreadsheet and looking at a list or filtering something through. I want something that's going to be easy to use, engaging, and will give me what I want quickly, rather than having to scroll across lots and lots of common columns, for example, and trying to find something that I want. So I think usability is a big one there, which I think spreadsheets are quite limited in. But for everything that kind of doesn't work well with spreadsheets, from my background, they are a really quick and easy fix way in to be able to start to build what it is that you want. And like with everything, you don't necessarily know what you need or want until you start to do something. And spreadsheets do give you the flexibility of doing that. And I completely agree with what I think both Rob and Ed had mentioned earlier, which is you need to understand what type of approach you want in managing your data catalogue or your data glossary to know what to go to market for if you do have a budget to go and get a proper tool. But I don't think there's anything out there to start with that would serve you better than a spreadsheet. I think there needs to be a mindfulness that mid to longer term, that is not going to serve your needs. The scale of data that is going to have to be required to create a robust and full glossary is going to have to be considered into some sort of tooling longer term. And we all know what it's like, I'm hoping, where you get spreadsheets so big, you just see the wheel of doom scrolling round and round, and there might be crashes and whatnot as well. So the risks around managing your data in standalone spreadsheets is quite high too. Never mind the ongoing confusion that might be created from various versions, confusion in who's doing what, how the collaboration works in a spreadsheet, etc., etc. It's endless, and actually you can end up spending all your conversation around Well, I said this, no, you said that. Well, this is the version I've got. No, that's the version that's 2 versions out of date. Oh, but so and so signed this off. Oh, no, they didn't. They weren't in. So and so signed that off instead. And all of those types of confusing conversations go on, and you kind of really deter from what it is that you're trying to achieve, which is meaningful definitions of the data terms that are used in the business.
Yeah.
So I know that's quite a kind of a very whistle-stop tour of my kind of my pet peeves, but also kind of likes of spreadsheets. I just think you need to start somewhere, and spreadsheets might be the way to start. But longer term, I think there always needs to be a plan in place to move away from that format.
I think that's a really good point, Rav. Has anybody else got anything to add?
Nicola, Ralph brings a really good point, because one of the things, when you look at a data catalog, I was at GE Healthcare, and they were putting in for the supply chain, they were putting in a data catalog, and they failed. And why did it fail? Because they put in this tool and nobody understood what it was. They didn't want to use it. It had no support. They didn't do any process change work with the organization. And that's one of the really nice things about doing a low budget data catalog, because you put it into place, it grows with you as you go. And you can, first of all, people will see at the end of the process, they see the benefit and they go, let's get a bigger tool so we can get some more horsepower out of this thing. But they also, you can manage instead of buying something really big, you do something small and give a real sense of movement in the project, so that people really appreciate that data catalog. And now you got some motivation and some impetus to push the project along, and maybe even buy the bigger software piece.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure we will get to that before the end of this call. But I think that's really true. And I think, a vote in favor of Excel or Google Sheets is people are familiar with them. You're not introducing them to something scary. It's something that they can get their head around. When at the moment they're trying to get their head around doing why they've got to do this data catalog in the first place. But at least if you give them a tool that they are familiar, it's slightly easier. So
I will just say one more
yeah,
thing,
carry
sorry, because it links to something I just saw in the chat from Simon. So I think one of the benefits of starting small with Excel or Google Sheets is obviously you can start to set standards across your organization. You can say, well, this is what we mean by a data definition. This is what it can be. These are the points we must capture in our data definition to make it useful. And starting to do that in Excel starts to get that discipline across early. So I think Simon's point is it important to be thinking about using metadata standards in these cataloging tools? And I think the answer is definitely yes. And I think that's where spreadsheets can help in the early days, because you can start to work out what those standards need to be. You start collecting definitions from 5 different people, and hey, guess what? You get 5 different styles of definition. Well, actually, let's make sure we put some standards in place in Excel early on, and then whatever tool we adopt, we can adopt it right from day one with the right standards.
Absolutely. I think that's really, really useful. So we've been talking about Excel, Google Sheets. Everybody on the call already knew about them. They're sitting there thinking, gosh, they haven't told us anything we hadn't already thought of. So I'm going to think back to just a few months ago when we were having one of our monthly calls, I was sharing a particular challenge that one of my clients had. And could anybody have any suggestions as to how I could tell them? Because it was they knew that I didn't know the answer, but they'd been venting. And I just thought I'd got this collected group of experts. Somebody might know an easy answer for them. And it was whilst I was sharing this that it was you, Rob Hawker, who said, well, I think they could use Power Apps to do that. And I think at this point I went, Power what's this? And I think the following month you came back and educated us all on Power Apps. And since then, I've never used them, but I'm now a great fan. And every client that says, how do I do this? Go, oh, do you use Power Apps? And then normally go, but I can't actually advise you on how to do it. But if they know what you're talking about and they have somebody that's already doing them in-house, they get really excited. So I think the question that now I've said that everybody listening on this call is going, what is she talking about? She's lost the plot. But since you explained what they were in the first place, Rob, I'm going to put you on the spot and go, so what are these Power Apps and how can they perhaps help us with when we're doing a data catalog?
Okie doke, no problem. So I'm just going to share my screen. I'm not going to bore everyone with slides for the whole time, I promise. I just have one slide. Um, and this is just to explain this thing called the Power Platform. So this is a product set from Microsoft, and there will be other similar things from other vendors, right? So if you're not Microsoft, don't worry. I suspect there are other things from other vendors that you might use. But basically, this is a suite of tools that allows you to both get yourself some business analytics, so to see what's going on in your organization, and that's on the left-hand side with Power BI, but then also to take action on your analytics as well. And this is where Power Apps, Power Automate, etc. fit in. So the idea of it, basically, I'll start with Power Apps. So this is a way of developing with very little code or no code at all, an application which you can then deploy in your business to fill a gap, any gap. So to give a simple example of where I've seen it used before, I was the head of data and analytics at a newly set up vaccine company a few years back, and that company had formed by acquisition. So it was a big company with quite a decent sales force, but without any systems or processes or anything like that, because the acquisition didn't come with that. It was a brand new company, like a startup, but with $1 billion turnover and a lot going on. And one thing they didn't have was a CRM system. And so for the very first year, they had a big spreadsheet capturing all the sales that they were making. So, and the pipeline of sales that they expected to make. So the number of doses of the vaccine that they expected to sell to different customers around the world. And then you've got competing salespeople going in and entering their sales figures and seeing everybody else's sales figures and everything else. And they had a plan to put a CRM system in, but that CRM system was going to take at least a year to get put into place. And they didn't necessarily have the budget right at the beginning as well. So what they did do was they worked with people inside the organization that had some basic skills in this Power Platform, and they built a CRM application essentially internally to capture that sales pipeline. So they just built a few simple screens to enable their their salespeople to enter the number of doses that they expected to sell. They could do that in client meetings from an iPad, so they could have a conversation with a customer and enter a number and press and submit it, and it all came through to a central repository, and then it could be reported in Power BI and then challenged potentially by the sales director to see if he thought or she thought it was he actually. I'm thinking back. If he thought that they could perhaps do a little bit more, or they were maybe overstating things in a few areas. So they built in just a couple of weeks an application that really filled that gap until they could get the CRM application in place. And that's a really common way that people will use this Power Platform. So you build that here in Power Apps, and it stores its data in tables, in just like database tables, basically, in this thing at the bottom called the Dataverse. So the Dataverse is like a common database which is there and available to all of these applications that you see on this page. So you've got Power Apps can write data into the Dataverse. Power Automate then is there to support workflows. So Ed was talking earlier on about workflows, like approving the sales pipeline in my example, or approving a new data item in our catalog. Power Automate is the thing that's going to help you send a request from the person that created the data item to the data steward that owns that domain, and click the kind of approve button to update the data. And I'm not going to spend too much more time on virtual agents and Power Pages. I mean, basically, with virtual agents, you can create a chatbot with some intelligence if you need someone to be able to ask questions about how you do your data governance or whatever it is you're thinking about. And the Power Pages is about creating websites, really. It's a bit like something that, an e-commerce platform, a light touch e-commerce platform or something like that, if you wanted to go down that road. And then Power BI, for those that don't know, reads in data from all sorts of different places. It can be your SQL databases, it can be AWS, it can read data from the Dataverse in this case, and it just then presents visualizations of that data. So graphs, charts, maps, etc., that help you figure out what's going on. So that's the Power Platform. And in this case, really the key thing that can help us is Power Apps and Power Automate. Does anyone want to jump in? And was that clear enough before I move on?
That's very clear. That's great. Great
Yeah.
overview.
Made sense to me, but we've heard it before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
But
sorry, Nicola.
no, go for it, Rob.
I was going to say, watch the chat for me, and if there's lots of question marks popping into the chat, I will happily try and
No,
clarify.
it's all quiet at the moment. So you've made it sound like, this is good and exciting stuff, but would you say that there are limitations of Power Apps? Because, if you can run a whole CRM system using them, do you need anything else ever again, or are there limitations?
There are definitely limitations. I mean, I think the first thing you have to remember is that usually when you're building something like this, it's somebody internally who happens to have these skills, or usually it's someone that's very keen to learn and finds the Power Platform and gets really excited about it and starts playing with it and gets good at it, but they have a day job as well. So the kind of problem you usually run into is that someone builds this great app for you almost as a favor, but then when it becomes big and there's suddenly 500 users and there are what would normally be support tickets popping up, they're not support tickets anymore because this is not a this is not an IT supported application with a support queue and all of those kinds of things. So you do tend to find that these things start off as a favor or a side of desk activity, and then it becomes challenging to own and maintain them. There are organizations though that have an application development management team that then will kind of own these going forward. So they can be citizen developed, if you like, by someone in the organization, but then they get owned by a professional IT team, and that's a really good model to go down. But often I do see them lack ownership, if that makes sense. But and the other thing I would say is, you're competing here with software vendors who spend all their time building that particular product, and they've got a team of developers building what they think their customers need from a data catalog point of view. And however much time you spend on your Power App, you're probably not going to keep up with them in terms of sophistication in the end. So you're not going to be buying, so coming back to the CRM system, real CRM systems do a lot more, right? You've got opportunities in the pipeline. You've got the conversion rates of those opportunities into real sales. You've got the ability to pay commission, actually make payments to salespeople through CRMs. You're not going to do all of that in a Power App, right? It's a CRM system is going to be much more sophisticated in the end. But the Power Apps, I think, sits really nicely in between the spreadsheet based approach with its massive limitations and the kind of industrialized system that you might buy in from a vendor.
Yeah, so you are going to do a quick demo for us so we can all see it. Before you do, I want to put the other Rob on the spot, if that's all right.
Yep.
Because I don't want to dive into this and get everybody really excited about Power Apps and going off to find their local expert in their organization. If we then get budget next year and we've wasted all our effort on building this low-code solution, if we're now going to go and buy a shiny new data governance tool. So, Rob, I've already kind of introduced you as my, guru on all things data governance tools. Do you think it is a waste of effort doing a low-code one if we're hoping that we'll get budget to buy a tool in the future?
Absolutely not. I mean, a very common path for companies who, let's say, have enough cash, and this is, for example, banks and big pharma, they get in the tool because they've got the money to do that, and then they start thinking about what they need to put in it. So I think the actual discipline of trying to figure out, from first principles, what data it is you want to manage and govern, and how you want to do that, and who you want to get involved. Absolutely, whether you start with Excel or whether you kind of move up into the Power Apps tools, I think they're a fantastic way of doing a kind of proof of value in the early days. Very much along the lines of, agile, fail fast, get something out there, get people to give feedback. One of the big criticisms of the banks when they got in they spend a lot of money on data catalog tools, particularly for regulations like BCBS 239, is that they came in, they landed, and the teams then were kind of spent a lot of time thinking about how they were going to get there, how they were going to set up their workflows, what data they were going to get in, how are they going to structure it. So I think absolutely that's one very good benefit. Another one is, starting off with a kind of a structured mindset, thinking about the reference data, thinking about the way that you describe, data entities, CDEs, what you want to govern. Quite often using a sort of a lower tech version can sort of almost sharpen your your sort of view of how you're going to do it. You know, sometimes it's actually easier to start off with slightly fewer features and capabilities because they really make you think. With workflows is a good example. You know, it's quite easy with some of the big tools to come up with all sorts of sophisticated workflows. Actually, when you build them and run them, you find that in practice, you know, you could have got away with something that was actually a lot simpler. And then I think you know, sort of finally, it's a really good way. You know, I mentioned of getting the sort of the feedback and the buy-in. You know, you'll know that having when you bring in different ways of working, having something which can be even if it's a bit of a mock-up, but to get the high-level message across about different ways of working in a more structured way, the fact that you know data's being governed, I think this can really help, and it's a quick way of doing that. If things don't work, you can change tack very quickly without any of the overheads. So I think to, you know, Rob's point about these environments can be, because they might be considered sort of slightly shadow IT or user developed, obviously you need to have controls about the way they're used. But I personally would say that the advantages, you know, massively outweigh that. And I think they're a very good way of starting on a data governance journey. If you haven't got the money, and we're talking here, you know, hundreds of thousands to spend on the data governance tools that are out there. There are obviously newer startups coming in, which probably you know might be worth thinking about. But absolutely, this is a great way of starting that journey.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. So it's almost like it's a continuum. And, you know, we can get a lot of benefit even from just our basic Excel. But if we haven't got the budget yet, but we have got Power Apps or something similar available, we can do something that helps move us in the right direction and it's not wasted, even if we will subsequently buy a tool. So I think this is really useful. And you can see, hopefully, everybody that's listening, why I got so excited when Rob H first told me about them. I go, oh, this sounds good. So Rob, other Rob now, did you want to do this little demo so that everybody here can see how it can work?
Sure, absolutely. Right. So first thing I'm just going to say two things actually. I reserve the right to cough and splutter at you because I'm getting over a cold and I can only talk for a certain amount of time until I start spluttering. And then secondly, what you're going to see here in terms of demo is my first ever Power App, and it's just a couple of hours of work. So just preparing for this session, just tried to find my way around. So there's not a lot of sophistication going on here, but hopefully in a way that's a good thing because it shows you what you can do in a couple of hours when you don't even know your way around the application. So I'm a Power BI expert, and obviously Power BI is part of the suite of applications I showed you before, and I've done quite a bit of Power Automate, but no Power Apps before. So anyway, there's my disclaimers out the way. So this is the app as it stands. So you have a very basic landing screen where you can either choose to create a new data item or edit an existing data item. So I'm just going to start with the edit an existing data item. So I very kindly got some data items from a colleague who's on the call, and then you can just come in here and then click a simple edit button up here, and make some changes to the data item. I'm just going to put a very simple RH on the end of that just for the purposes of the time, and then just click the button, and you can see it stays in this status of pending review. And then if I go over to my Outlook, we're going to see, well, we're not going to see anything. There we go. Please review a data item. There's with my data item name in it. I'm going to click the link. Going to take me into another screen where it says pending review. At the moment, I couldn't find a quick way within my 2 hours of just having a simple tick button in here. So I have to edit it first and then click my tick button. But as you can see, because I'm the approver, when I click the tick button the second time, it came up and said the data item has now been approved. And if I go back to my calendar, back into my inbox, you can see I've got another email straight away where that data item's been approved. So we've got that little bit of control. We're making sure that things are only in that pending status, unless they are actually approved by the data steward, which for finance happened to be me, so on and so forth. So you get the idea. And obviously I can create a new one anytime I want. In terms of how this was created, the very first step is just to go to what's called the Dataverse that I mentioned in the slide. So I'm here in make.powerapps.com, and I have access to this just simply because I'm a Microsoft 365 user. So I pay for, on my own little tenant, I pay for an E5 license, which gives me access to various things, Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate included. You get this at E3 level as well, which is a slightly lower, cheaper level of licensing, but you don't get Power BI. And I can just come in here and I can click on tables, and you can see it has a whole bunch of standard tables in here already. I didn't create all of these. These are here because Microsoft gives you a sort of standard set of tables that you might use if you're an organization. I've created a couple of custom tables. So this Amazon Product UK was one of my custom ones, which I use in one of my Power BI training sessions. And then I created a data catalog table in here as well. And you just click new table and you can import a spreadsheet if you want to. You can just define all the columns that you want. So you can see I just defined a very simple structure: data item name, created on, data domain, data definition, and the status is handled in a slightly different way. And all I had to do was click create an app, and then it takes you to that app canvas screen that you saw at the beginning. And then you can just define what pages you want in your app. So I've got my welcome screen, my data catalog screen, my data catalog approver screen, where I can change the status from pending to approved. And this was all pretty much standard. I haven't done that much to this. And then the last part down here, you have Power Automate embedded. So I have review data item in here, and I can edit the workflow. Basically, I can say when something happens in my app, then I want to send an email, and I could put really complicated rules in here if I wanted to. So I could put a condition in here, for example, and say if it's this particular for each of my requests that come through, if the value is finance, then send it to this group of people. If the value is not finance, then send it to that group of people. But it's all it's point and click basically. And I used it where there was a tiny bit of coding. I just used Microsoft Copilot, which is essentially ChatGPT, to help me get the language together. So I don't know the language in Power Apps, but I was still able to do a reasonable job. And then the last thing I just want to show very quickly, I'm now here in Power BI, and just in seconds, I was able to connect to the Dataverse and pull in all of my data items, counting my data items, as you can see. And you can see from the color scheme here, approved is the nice light blue color, and the pending ones are the dark blue color. And I'm able to see then which domains have got the most data items and how they're approved and all of those things. And in terms of getting hold of that data, it's very, very easy. I just go new source. I just go to Dataverse, click connect, and then I have access to all of my different tables in here. So I can type data catalog, for example. There's my data catalog table number 1. Click OK. And then here we go. Here's my data catalog table that contains all my data items in here. There you go. You can see, could filter this to just the contact domain, for example, and there's the data items for just the contact domain. So I know that's a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it brings that slide to life. Going back to my single slide, we created the table in the Dataverse. We built an app on top of it so we could edit it. We automated the approvals through the emails that you saw, and then finally we were able to very quickly see how much progress we're making with our data catalog. So that's it. Anything?
That was amazing, Rob. And I think, I think probably most people on this call, particularly you guys that are helping with this masterclass, you all know that I'm a data geek, not a tech geek. But you made that look so simple that, I could probably do a quick course and create something. And, that took you 2 hours from not having ever built a Power App before. I think that is really powerful what you could do compared to a straightforward spreadsheet. So I don't know if the rest of the panel got any thoughts on it. Or you're all stunned.
Very stunned. Actually, it's really amazing how much power that's got. I do have a question for Rob though. What kind of licensing would you have to have? Would everybody in the organization have to have level 5, I think it is, you said? Or
E5,
do you publish that as the HTML files, right? The web file.
That's a great question, Ed. So when you're first getting started with this, you can build your app and test it out and give it to anyone you want initially. without any cost at all, unless you're using certain premium aspects of it, which are pretty rare. I don't run into those very often. But when you start to roll it out widely, you as a developer would need to pay for your own license for Power Apps. So I think you might end up spending something like £17 a month as a developer, and that gives you the right to roll your app out to a wide range of people. So we're still talking pretty.
Would not need that seven. It would be
The
one
end user wouldn't need it. No, that's my understanding of it anyway.
So there is a small cost, but nothing like the other Rob was telling us that a software tool is going to cost.
No.
Excellent. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. We've got like a whole minute left. We've got a couple of questions. I think I saw one. Where is it? Quite early on, where I'm going to say your name wrong. Sandia asked what the best practices are considered when designing data catalog workflows. I don't know. Is that a quick answer to whichever of you think you can answer that one?
Can you repeat it, Nicola? Sorry, I missed it.
What are the best practices to
I see
consider
it.
when designing data catalog workflow steps? Would it just be kind of, is it the same as I would always try? Let's start with like the simple business rules about what you want to happen. Who needs to, what is it? Who needs to see it kind of thing?
Yeah, I always looked at who's going to be maddest if something changes in that, right? Those people need approval steps, and then the people who need it need to get notified of it. So that's the easiest way to start with it, and then you can build that out as you're building out the entire process. It really depends on your process more than any single data. So who do you have approving? Who do you have that needs to get the information to be able to use it? Who needs to understand it to be able to make changes in the organization? So a lot of times you can use the RACI matrix where you're looking at the accountability and who needs to see it, and then build your steps around that.
That makes a lot of sense. Excellent. I think we're virtually out of time. I think Brian shared open metadata, which you've made Ed's whole Christmas now. He's got a new tool he hadn't heard of that he can go and look into. So thank you for sharing that one, Brian. I have a feeling we'll be hearing about that at one of our calls next year. And J. Playford said, yes, I've seen that a lot. An Excel spreadsheet on SharePoint. I think that's better than just an Excel spreadsheet in the wild. So I think that's a good idea. I've seen people do that. Yes, and we've got Joseph saying as well that SharePoint is a SharePoint list is a good place and can also be easily integrated. Excellent. So I'm just
going to say something quick on SharePoint lists. Sorry. So if you do want to use SharePoint lists and you were thinking of using Power BI to read those SharePoint lists, just be really careful with that, because Power BI is very, very slow at reading SharePoint lists for some reason. It's just one of the sources I hate working with Power BI. It grinds away loading the data in for some reason.
Excellent. So it's always good to know that. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. And thank you, Rav, Ed, Rob, and Rob. I definitely couldn't have done it without you. I'm good at answering these kind of questions, asking them, not answering them. So it's really great to have you all here helping everybody. And hopefully we've inspired some people to go and build their own Power Apps. So yeah, thank you so much all for joining. I hope you have found it useful. And hopefully this was the first time I've done a webinar with a panel of my data friends. So perhaps we'll have to do another one if we can get the right topic. So thank you very much, everybody. Bye.